Medicine in New York.
Heart disease or not, and I tend to fictionalize like everything that goes into the words that I write for songs. So as a lyricist, there's maybe like, I'm not kidding, like 8 songs in the whole.
So the idea here is this approach could provide a one-time treatment that would lower cholesterol for a lifetime, hopefully preventing lots of unnecessary deaths.
So you don't have to remember to take the medicine for years and years.
Exactly.
So how does it work?
There's a Boston company called Verve Therapeutics, and they're using a new version of the revolutionary gene editing technique known as CRISPR called base editing. Base editing lets scientists literally rewrite individual letters in the genetic code. In this case, scientists are editing a gene inside the body, in the liver, involved in LDL cholesterol production. And at a meeting of the American Heart Association in Philadelphia yesterday, company researchers reported the results they've gotten from the first 10 patients treated so far. They're suffering from a genetic condition known as familial hypercholesterolemia. That's a genetic disorder that causes super high cholesterol. They often die young from heart attacks or strokes, and the company says the 3 patients who got high enough doses to have an impact experienced significant reductions in their LDL levels. One patient's cholesterol has remained low for at least 6 months, and so far the treatment looks safe. Here's Dr. Sheikh Katharesa, who runs Verve.
We're super excited. This is the first ever evidence that one can actually rewrite a single DNA letter in the liver of a human being and have a clinical effect. So we're thrilled.
And you know, Steve, he hopes this could eventually offer a treatment not just for patients with this genetic condition, but for anyone with high cholesterol.
But you're using the verb hopes. What questions remain?
Yeah, obviously this has been tested only on a very, very small number of patients so far who've only been followed for a very short period of time. You know, a lot more patients will have to be treated and followed for a lot longer to really see how well it works and whether it's safe. And one big concern is the editing could make some sort of mistake that could have long-term health implications. And you know, Steve, it's likely to be very expensive, so we'll just have to see.
So rewriting a single letter changes so much, which is why maybe we're going to now try calling you Ronstein or Rodstein instead of Robstein.
A single letter can make all the difference, Steve.
It's Rob Stein, NPR health correspondent.
Thanks, Dan. I mean, Steve.
Oh, yes, exactly. It's Morning Edition from NPR News, or MPR News. I'm Steve Inskeep.
And I'm Layla Faultley. It's 8:50. Good morning. This is 91.7 WVXU. Coming up on the BBC NewsHour, an update on the critical situation at Al-Shifa, Gaza's largest hospital, a cabinet reshuffle. The UK's Prime Minister and former Prime Minister David Cameron becomes Foreign Secretary, plus the threat of an imminent volcanic eruption in Iceland. It's all coming up on the BBC NewsHour starting at 9 on 91.7 WVXU. Southbound 75 at Pfeiffer. The 2 right lanes are blocked by a wreck. Traffic is stop and go from 275.
Support comes from the Cincinnati Symphony presenting Sibelius Symphony No. 5, November 25th and 26th at Music Hall. Conductor Dalia Stasevska returns to lead a Thanksgiving weekend of music that calls us home. Works by Dvorak, Kaya Sayahu, and George Walker all lead up to Sibelius' sweeping 5th Symphony. Tickets at cincinnati-symphony.org. Season sponsor Western and Southern.
Support for WVXU comes from the Charles H. Dater Foundation, enriching young lives in Greater Cincinnati by making grants to nonprofit organizations, including Santa Maria Community Services, Burnside, and Boys and Girls Club. More information at daterfoundation.org.
9 first morning weather, partly cloudy today, the high 62, clear tonight, down to 35, and tomorrow partly cloudy, the high temperature 58. It's 35 now in Cincinnati. On Cincinnati Edition at noon today, a discussion of anti-stalking bills in Ohio and a conversation with a journalist and author about the origins of inequality.
Local support for Marketplace Morning Report comes from Bartlett Wealth Management. Wealth management takes time. Time that can be better spent managing a business. The experienced team at Bartlett helps cut through the noise of a complex financial situation so clients can focus on what they manage best, their businesses. More at Bartlett1898.com.
It's Monday and there's no deal in sight to keep the federal government open.
Marketplace Morning Report is supported by C3 AI. C3 Generative AI provides ChatGPT enterprise search that is verifiable, secure, and accurate across all enterprise data. C3.ai. This is enterprise AI. And by Odoo, focused on providing all-in-one open-source business management software with fully integrated applications for every business need. More at odoo.com.
I'm David Brancaccio in New York. The money runs out this Friday. If there's no funding agreement by then, the federal government partially shuts down. For investors, America is less of a good bet. Marketplace's Nancy Marshall-Genzer has this update.
There has been some progress. House Speaker Mike Johnson has unveiled a two-part stopgap funding bill to keep the government going temporarily. The first part expires in January. The second lasts until February. The Senate is working on its own funding measure. Two houses have to pass the same legislation, then send it to the White House for President Biden's signature, all before Friday. All the foot-dragging and drama led the ratings agency Moody's to lower its outlook on the U.S. credit rating to negative from stable. Moody's issued a statement blaming the move on what it called continued political polarization in the U.S. It said that raises the risk that, quote, successive governments will not be able to reach consensus on a fiscal plan to slow the decline in debt affordability. It's gotten much more expensive for the federal government to borrow because interest rates have risen. Moody's did not downgrade the U.S. credit rating. It's still at Moody's highest AAA level. But other credit rating agencies like Fitch have lowered their ratings to AA+. I'm Nancy Marshall-Genzer for Marketplace.
S&P and NASDAQ futures are both down 0.3%. Using Mortgage News Daily's calculation for average 30-year fixed-rate home loans, we start the week at 7.56%. Up late last week, but still well below the 8% peak on October the 19th.
Marketplace Morning Report is supported by Amazon Business. From small business to big enterprise and everything in between, Amazon Business helps simplify the supplies buying process. Amazon Business, your partner for smart business buying. And by How We Survive. Climate change is dire, but it does not have to be world-ending. Tune in to the new season of How We Survive from Marketplace.
Now to a voice from Los Angeles about the unaffordability of that city. About a quarter of people working in the leisure and hospitality industries there are Latinx. And of those, Latinas face a gender wage gap that, according to one estimate, means Latina workers miss out on about $1.2 million in pay throughout their careers. U.S. News has identified L.A. as the second most expensive city in which to live in the U.S., just behind San Diego. These gaps are part of what's fueling the current hotel workers' strike in Southern California.
You've been on strike for over 4 hard months. This is not just your fight, it's all of our fight. Luchamos juntos.
My name is Brenda Mendoza. I'm a uniform attendant at the JW Marriott. I've been working at the Marriott for about 14 years now. When I first started working at the hotel, it was my first hotel I've ever worked at. For me, it was, super excited working on a new property that was just finished being built. And, the pay rate back then for me it was great. I got to the point on April of last year, seeing that the rent was almost hitting $3,000 for a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom unit. I said, that's, a payment for a house. So I took that leap of faith and I purchased my home. But my home, I had to purchase it in Apple Valley because that's where I was able to buy it. I wake up at 3 in the morning. We have to be out of the house by 3:30 to be able to make it to my first boy's job that he starts at 5:30 in the morning. My shift starts at 7 in the morning, so I have to leave my husband at 6:30 at his job. So he waits quite a while because he starts at 8 a.m. in the morning. So he's the one that waits outside until his shift starts. And I keep the car. It's been difficult, having to sacrifice, not sleeping much like I was before. I get tired of driving basically 100 miles coming down and going back up. But, we make those sacrifices for our family to have something, for the future. When we go into work, we put everything. We give our energy, we give the better of ourselves, We don't want to be overworked and underpaid. We want to be treated as equal. And I come from, like, my grandma, my mother, they were housekeepers. So I see the work that they put in, how physically, the job is, and how they're left after working so many years. Physically, they're just, they're just tired. They're hurt from everywhere. My grandma passed away August. She had so many health issues, that probably if she would have taken care of herself back then, but she needed to work. She gave everything to doing the housekeeping position. Since she's worked her whole life doing that in the hotels. So, that's one of the reasons why I push and I help, the union and coworkers to, help us so we know that we can have something better for the future. And it's not going to be easy. It's going to be a challenge. But we have to fight for what we believe in, what we deserve. Because we put in so much of our lives into these jobs. Physically, it's, tiring. It's just a lot. And sometimes we make sacrifices like I do, along with my family.
A view from striking hotel worker Brenda Mendoza, who lives in Apple Valley, California, a bit like moving near Philadelphia to work in New York City. Marketplace's Erica Soderstrom produced that. 3 big Los Angeles hotels have struck deals with workers in that ongoing strike: Lowe's Hollywood, the Westin Bonaventure, and the Biltmore in Los Angeles. And United Auto Workers members continue to vote on tentative contracts with Ford, GM, and the Chrysler Jeep people. These are not slam dunks. On Friday, workers at a GM assembly plant in Flint, Michigan narrowly said no to the contract. Meanwhile, at some Ford plants in Kentucky, there's no aggregate tally, but production workers said no, but skilled trade workers said yes, as all the locals continue to vote. In New York, I'm David Brancaccio with the Marketplace Morning Report. 8 p.m., American Public Media.
Good morning. It's a minute before 9 o'clock. This is 91.7 WVXU. Partly cloudy today. The high 62. It's 35 now in Cincinnati.
Support comes from Bova Furniture. Since 1985, Bova's 20,000 square foot showroom has served the tri-state area with lines of contemporary furniture offering design, quality, and value in mind, helping create living spaces to suit a range of budgets. For design and space inspiration, you can take a virtual tour of the store by visiting bovafurniture.com.
Support comes from Cincinnati's Ronald McDonald House, which keeps families with critically ill children together while they seek life-saving medical care far from home. Your support gives them the care they need and eases financial and emotional burdens. You can learn more about ways to give at rmhcincinnati.org. That's rmhcincinnati.org.
91.7 WVXU Cincinnati and 88.5 WMUP Oxford. News from Cincinnati Public Radio and NPR. Welcome to NewsHour from the BBC World Service. I'm Nuala McGovern. Today, heavy fighting in northern Gaza. Doctors say their hospitals are overwhelmed.
We have now over 500 wounded. We have pregnant women who are needing cesarean section, needing delivery, and there's only 2 operating rooms and 3 surgeons.
We'll be speaking to Israel's defense forces. Also, after a tumultuous few days in British politics, the current Prime Minister Rishi Sunak appoints a former Prime Minister David Cameron as Foreign Minister. Also, the holy grail of cricket bowling, 6 wickets in 6 bowls, plus one of James Joyce's weirder words. So, just how long does it take to read Finnegan's Wake? That's all coming up after this news.
Hello, I'm Roisin Hastie with the BBC News. Britain's Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has appointed one of his predecessors, David Cameron, as Foreign Secretary in a reshuffle prompted by his sacking of the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. Mr Cameron resigned as Prime Minister after the Brexit referendum he'd called, hoping Britain would remain in the EU. Ms Braverman has come under pressure after she accused the police of bias. Rob Watson reports.
Even by recent standards, this is a dramatic day in British politics. Suella Braverman was one of Britain's most controversial Home Secretaries ever, a right-wing populist who most recently described pro-Palestinian demonstrations in London as hate marches. But clearly Rishi Sunak has now decided she is more of a liability than an asset. In another eye-catching and politically risky move, Mr. Sunak has brought back the former Prime Minister David Cameron, a man with much experience, but derided by many for his role in Britain leaving the EU.
Hamas health officials say more than 30 patients have died following power cuts due to fuel shortages at Gaza's biggest hospital, Al-Shifa. Around 2,000 people are reported to be trapped there. Tom Bateman reports.
The war is closing in on northern Gaza, with further reports of armed clashes and heavy Israeli bombardment around Al-Shifa hospital. One doctor there describes the situation as a siege. The Israeli army says it has allowed evacuation routes, but these are fraught with deadly risk. Medics have renewed their plea over the fate of more than 30 premature babies who may die because they say the neonatal intensive care unit stopped functioning due to power failures. 3 of the babies died over the weekend, say staff. The rest desperately need help. In Israel, the pressure on the government to get hostages freed is intensifying.
And discomfort in hands or feet due to aging. Learn more at nervivehealth.com. This is NPR.
From NPR News, this is All Things Considered. I'm Elsa Chang.
And I'm Ari Shapiro. For the first time, the U.S. Supreme Court is adopting a code of ethics for the justices. This comes after growing criticism about wealthy benefactors giving gifts and trips to certain justices. There have been revelations that Justice Clarence Thomas received such favors from Harlan Crow, a Republican donor, and others, including Justice Samuel Alito, have also been criticized for their relationships with donors and activists. Public trust in the court has fallen as the revelations pile up. NPR Legal Affairs correspondent Nina Totenberg has been reading this new ethics code. She's here in the studio. Hey, Nina.
Hey there, Ari.
So what is in the code?
The headline, I think, is that the code is trying to be relatively specific about what justices can and cannot do, but there's no enforcement mechanism as to what they're supposed not to do. So, for example, the code's very specific about financial transactions. You can have a real estate transaction as long as it's not before the court. And, of course, this code reaffirms the commitment to the disclosure provisions that are in the existing code for all judges and that have not been entirely followed in the past. And it's very specific about family members, spouses, children, grandchildren, and recusal if one of those has a case before the court or is a lawyer before the court.
You mentioned spouses. There's been a lot of criticism of Justice Thomas's wife and her activities to promote political causes that end up in the court. Also, Justice Sotomayor has been criticized for using her staff in setting up her schedule and trips in her book tour. Have either of those sorts of cases been addressed in this code?
Well, the code says that if a spouse or child living with the justice has a substantial interest in the outcome of a case, financial and any other interest, the justice is supposed to recuse. Now, it would appear that that would mean that Justice Thomas would have had to recuse in matters in which his wife played a major role because she had a political business and was an advocate for political causes. But when it comes to book tours, the code is pretty clear that in scheduling trips, the court, for security reasons, must allow justices to use their office resources in making plans and that they may accept reasonable expense compensation. And the code even specifies that a justice may appear at events where her books are being sold.
But you said there is no enforcement mechanism. So what happens if a justice violates these rules?
Really nothing that we know of. There is no enforcement mechanism. The code also makes clear that they shouldn't be speaking at any sort of a fundraising event for a cause that obviously might come before the court. They can attend, but they can't fundraise.
So this is a first, but it's also kind of toothless. Are the court's critics satisfied with it?
No, they weren't going to be satisfied no matter what, and this doesn't satisfy, I think, some of their critiques, which are for enforcement. So the progressive group Take Back the Court said, with 53 uses of the word should and only 6 of the word must, the court's new code of ethics reads a lot like a friendly suggestion rather than a binding enforceable guideline. Now, I did talk to Stephen Gillers before we went on the air. He's a leading ethics expert, and he said this is better than he expected, more detailed than he expected, but no enforcement mechanism, and that is the sort of Achilles heel.
NPR Legal Affairs correspondent Nina Totenberg, thank you.
Thank you.
Sex, celebrity, politics with teeth. That was how the feminist website Jezebel defined itself. And after 16 years, Jezebel shut down last week. Its parent company, Geo Media, said it was restructuring to cope with economic headwinds and a difficult digital advertising environment. Jezebel was a pioneer, publishing pieces about issues of gender and power before they were on the forefront of the digital media landscape. Anna Holmes created the website back in 2007 and joins me now. Hi, Anna.
Hi.
Let me just start by asking, what has the last week been like for you after the news that Jezebel shut down?
You know, I felt a little shocked at first, but I didn't feel really horrible about it because I kept looking at it through the lens of other media. In fact, when I started the site, I wasn't sure whether it would be successful at all.
Really?
So 16 years feels like a good run. I'm sad about the people who lost their jobs. There was a fair number of them. But as one person put it, perhaps Jezebel was a victim of its own success. A lot of the subjects and the tone embedded themselves into the DNA of more traditional or mainstream publications. A lot of the alumni of the site now work at those publications. So it's not that it didn't have an effect on the larger culture. It's just that perhaps it was time for it to end.
I want to go back to those early days when you were first hired and creating this blog. At that point, there was really nothing else like it in the media landscape. What was your vision for what ultimately became Jezebel?
Well, there was my vision, and then there was the vision of the company that hired me's owner, Nick Denton. He wanted a women's website that would, have a scrappy attitude. What I don't think Nick realized was the way in which we were going to be explicitly political, and by political I mean not just around, let's say, electoral politics, but gender politics and around racial politics. I felt very strongly that it was something that we had to lean into, especially because of my experience working at women's magazines in the years preceding the creation of Jezebel. And I had found those women's magazines to be incredibly one-note, heteronormative, they were very white. The magazines didn't reflect the full range of interests of young women. I was particularly irritated by the ways in which we collectively were teaching young women who they were and how to be.
I mean, in many ways, I am a person who really grew up with Jezebel. I think I was a freshman in college when the site launched, and as somebody who knew early on that they wanted to become a journalist or a writer, it was a site that I knew I always had to read for all of the reasons that we've been talking about. The themes, the fact that it was irreverent and smart and funny, but felt really relevant to my life. And I know that I'm not alone after seeing all of the tributes that have poured out in recent days in the amount of affection that I felt and still feel for Jezebel. But I want to ask you, how would you describe what Jezebel meant and means? It's never moving.
And once again, we don't want to lose track of the fact that Cincinnati Museum Center, or in this case Union Terminal, still does have train history. The Cardinal still comes through here. And it's a great chance to just kind of come down here, walk the different concourses, see the Get Into Nature Gallery, see the Dino Hall, but also explore Holiday Junction. I want to kick snow around. Are we allowed to bring shovels? I don't think we're allowed to bring shovels.
We discourage shovels, but you're welcome to wear your winter boots.
That's right. Kick some of that snow around. One of the other things that I love seeing is the eyes of young people when you have the Lego exhibit as well. It's almost become a tradition to have Lego at Cincinnati Museum Center.
That's true, and I mean, wow, talk about creativity. When you walk into that gallery, to think about all of the hours and all of the painstaking work and ingenuity that's gone into creating these Lego models just blows my mind. And there are new facets to the models every year. They bring something new, and there are some favorites you'll recognize from past years.
But I love looking for sort of the Easter eggs hidden in the model. If you look really closely, you can find some really fun sort of hidden scenes and little jokes that the Cincy Lego users group, the adult and kid artists who do these creations, put in for us to find. It's just a really magical part of Holiday Junction.
And it's almost like when you watch Disney things and you look for the little hidden Mickeys in different parts of the illustration or animation. It's a lot of fun to look for different, as you said, Easter eggs that are in there. Boy, we're dating ourselves on that because it was something that came out in DVDs years ago. We're way past Blu-ray already, but Easter eggs are those little hidden nuggets that you can find that might be hidden, but not hidden so well that you'll never find them. So I want to come back to the trains for just a moment because Cincinnati has an incredible history of toy trains as well, and I have to bring up the name, and this is one that I've learned from David Conti, who for many, many years was the curator of history objects here. And he mentions Carlisle and Finch, which is a company that actually had to pivot in World War II and actually helped with the war effort. But prior to that, they were making toy trains that were there, and it was just amazing.
That's right. Carlisle and Finch is always popular with visitors. It has so much amazing history to it, and it's a really wonderful thing. The thing that I like about the trains is they are artifacts. I mean, they are historical objects, but we don't store them away in collections. We bring them out and actually have them run. I think that's part of the magic of Holiday Junction.
It's kind of like a show and tell for the holidays. And I have to tell you, I remember we had a chance to interview Stephen Lowe, who was the Omnimax film producer of one of the great train films of all time here at Cincinnati Museum Center in the Omnimax. And we're walking down to see Holiday Junction, one of the early iterations of Holiday Junction here. And I could not stop telling him about the dioramas. And that is where, literally, Cincinnati Museum Center and some of the
Avenue southbound at Struble Road, and a wheelbarrow on the roadway at Ohio 562 Norwood Lateral westbound near US 42 and Reading Road. This report is made possible by AAA Bob Summerall Tire and Services. Support comes from the Anderson Community Band, presenting At the Movies, celebrating the music of John Williams and Henry Mancini. The concert includes music from Harry Potter, Lincoln, The Cowboys, The Great Race, the complete main title music from Star Wars, and more. The program also includes Moon River from Breakfast at Tiffany's, performed on trumpet by ACB's own Brad Bennick. Open to the public Sunday, November 19th at 7 p.m. in the Anderson Center Theater. More on Facebook or at andersoncommunityband.com. Close your eyes and let the New York Chamber Orchestra sweep you away to an echoing cathedral in Italy. Though not performed by a choir, here's the Gregorian Chant for String Orchestra by Paul Preston on WGUC.
Stocks finished mixed on Wall Street ahead of new economic data about inflation from the government. The Dow gained 54 points. This is
.7 WVXU. I'm Bill Reinhardt. Ohio Republicans who dominate the General Assembly are suggesting they won't change abortion laws, even though voters passed an amendment last week to enshrine abortion rights in the state's constitution. State House correspondent Joe Ingles reports backers of a proposed constitutional change for redistricting say this is one more example of why their proposal is needed.
Voters could see an amendment next year creating a citizens commission to draw lawmakers' district maps. Jen Knoll with the League of Women Voters of Ohio is among those working on it, and she says voters made their will known in the last 2 elections.
It is absolutely clear that the Ohio legislature is not in tune with the people of Ohio, and that's because of gerrymandering.
But John Fortney, a spokesman for Republican Senate President Matt Huffman, says redistricting reform backers are trying to help Democrats. Joe Rogers at the Ohio Public Radio Statehouse News Bureau.
Researchers at Christ Hospital's Women's Heart Center are raising awareness about diseases that can feel like a heart attack, but when tested, patients' arteries aren't blocked. Patty Hutton of Liberty Township spent 15 years begging doctors for answers about her stabbing chest pains.
I actually started thinking that maybe it was in my head because nobody was listening to me. So I was very thankful when I saw Dr. Casada, and she assured me that there was actually something wrong with me.
Medical Director Dr. Odaime Casada says these microvascular and ischemic heart diseases disproportionately affect women and are vastly underdiagnosed.
Number one, we need to raise awareness, but number two, we definitely need new treatment options because a lot of patients, even if we put them on all of those medications, they still have ongoing symptoms, and many times we don't have other options for them.
Quesada and other researchers are set to publish some of their findings later this year. You can read more at wvxu.org. Some patchy frost possible again tonight, otherwise mostly clear skies, 35 for the overnight low. Mostly sunny on Tuesday, a high tomorrow of 60 with a chance of more patchy frost Tuesday night. It's 60 degrees now.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Data IQ, a platform for everyday AI, dedicated to helping teams move beyond the lab to build generative AI applications at enterprise scale. DATAIKU.com. And from your part-time controller, specializing in nonprofit accounting, helping nonprofit organizations, including homeless shelters, with their accounting needs. More at yourparttimecontroller.com. This is NPR.
This is All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Elsa Chang in Culver City, California.
And I'm Ari Shapiro in Washington. The 13th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution abolished slavery with an exception. It declares neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist except as punishment for a crime. Prison rights advocates say that exception, which also exists in 16 state constitutions, allows forced labor in prisons. And there is a growing movement across the country to get rid of it. As NPR's Meg Anderson reports, advocates in the first state to change its constitution are struggling to make the change on paper a reality in prison.
Richard LaGrassi has been in prison in Colorado for the last 20 years.
Hello? Can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me okay? A few months into the pandemic, he got called to work in his prison's kitchen. It was hot and crowded, and after about 2 months, he noticed he was having trouble sleeping.
I was always anxious about having to go to the kitchen and work under these conditions for hours and not knowing when I was going to be able to go back to my unit and get some bread.
LaGrassi has a history of PTSD, and he kept asking for breaks from the job. Eventually, the guards stopped making him go to the kitchen, but LaGrassi says they also punished him. He says he was moved to a unit with less access to the outdoors and to phones, and he lost earned time for good behavior. His experience is typical. Most people in prison work. In prison kitchens, in DMV call centers. They make license plates, furniture for schools, hand sanitizer during COVID. In 14 states, prisoners fight wildfires, like the man in this story from member station KQED in California.
It's rugged. I mean, a lot of mountains, a lot of rough terrain, then the thick brush, the heat.
3/4 of prison workers say they're required to do those jobs. That's according to the most recent data from the Bureau of Justice Statistics.
The reality is, once people enter the prison gates, they lose the right to refuse to work.
Jennifer Turner is a human rights researcher at the ACLU. She says prisoners often make less than $1 an hour, sometimes doing hard or dangerous work. And most of the labor laws protecting people outside of prison do not apply inside. She says it's common for inmates to be punished